2 seconds, Bumpy Johnson and Malcolm X locked eyes across a crowded room. No words, no movement, just a men who fully understood each other. It was February 21st, 1965. The Audubon Ballroom. Thomas Hagen was rising, a shotgun coming out from beneath his coat. 400 people had no idea what was about to happen. But Bumpy did. He was 10 feet behind Hagen, gun already in his hand, finger on the trigger. One bullet, one dead assassin. Malcolm lives. That's when Malcolm turned and saw the gun, saw the decision Bumpy was about to make. Malcolm slowly shook his head, then smiled. Bumpy's eyes dropped to the little girl between them brown dress. Pigtails, maybe 6 years old. She had slipped off her father's lap, climbed onto a chair, and leaned into the aisle, directly in the line of fire. If Bumpy pulled the trigger now, the bullet would pass through her before ever reaching Hagen. When Bumpy looked back up, Malcolm mouthed 3 words. "I die standing." 2 seconds later, the shotgun blast echoed through the ballroom. Bumpy Johnson didn't save Malcolm X that day. But what he did in the next 15 seconds is why the killer never escaped. To understand that Sunday afternoon, you have to understand the promise Bumpy made 3 days earlier. February 14th, 1965, Valentine's Day, 2:46 in the morning. Malcolm X's house in Queens exploded in flames. Molotov cocktails crashed through the bedroom window. His wife, Betty, and their 4 daughters, the oldest, only 6, barely escaped with their lives. The girls stood in the freezing street in their nightgowns, crying, covered in soot, watching their home burn. Malcolm knew who was responsible. The Nation of Islam. Elijah Muhammad's enforcers, the brothers he had once trusted with his life. They wanted him dead for leaving, for exposing Elijah's corruption, for speaking truth when silence was expected. The morning after the fire, Bumpy Johnson walked into Columbia Presbyterian Hospital unannounced. No phone call, no flowers. He arrived at dawn in his tailored suit and fedora. He found Malcolm in the waiting room while doctors examined his daughters for smoke inhalation. Bumpy sat beside him. He didn't say hello. He went straight to the point. "Give me 48 hours. The men who did this won't see Wednesday." Malcolm stared at the floor, exhausted and traumatized. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but sad. "If you do that, I become everything they say I am, a hypocrite, hiding behind a gangster's gun. You'd be alive. I'd be dead inside." Malcolm turned to face him. "I've spent 10 years preaching that violence breeds violence. I can't abandon that the moment I'm afraid." Bumpy's jaw tightened. "This ain't about principles, Malcolm. This is about your wife, your babies. They could have burned alive last night." "God, no," Malcolm said, his voice cracking slightly. "But if I let you kill for me, I destroy everything I've built. Violence for violence. Blood for blood. That's the cycle I'm trying to break." Bumpy respected the answer. He hated it, but he respected it. "Then let me protect you. 24/7. My best men, armed, watching." Malcolm shook his head. "You're a dead man, Malcolm. You know that?" "Maybe." Malcolm extended his hand. "But I'll die clean. I'll die standing." Bumpy shook his hand and held it for a moment. "They won't get away with it." "I know," Malcolm said quietly, "but don't do it for me. I've made my peace." At the door, Bumpy stopped. 3 days, Malcolm. I'm giving you 3 days to change your mind." Malcolm smiled. "I won't." 3 days later, on Saturday night, Bumpy's phone rang at 2:47 a.m. It was a 19-year-old busboy named Jerome who worked the graveyard shift at a diner on Malcolm X Boulevard. Jerome had grown up 3 blocks from Bumpy's apartment, and like half the young men in Harlem, he knew exactly who to call when something didn't feel right. "Mr. Johnson," Jerome said, his voice shaking. 3 men just left my diner, corner booth. They were talking about handling the preacher problem. He mentioned tomorrow. He mentioned Audubon. He mentioned shotguns. Bumpy sat upright in bed. Names. One of them. They called him Hagen. Thomas Hagen. Bumpy closed his eyes. He knew that name. A Nation of Islam enforcer. Cold, efficient. A true believer who thought killing was sacred work. You did good, Jerome. Real good. Now, forget you've ever heard anything. After hanging up, Bumpy tried calling Malcolm. No answer. He sent word through every contact he had. Nothing came back. So, on Sunday, February 21st, Bumpy Johnson broke his own rules. He went alone. At 2:15 p.m., the Audubon Ballroom was filling fast. 400 people, families, students, elderly women who had known Malcolm when he was a street hustler, young men who saw him as the voice of a new America. Bumpy entered in his usual dark suit. Nothing flashy. He didn't need flash. His power lived in silence. He didn't sit in the back. He moved into the crowd and positioned himself against a pillar on the left side, row 5. Clear sightlines. Close enough to act. Multiple exits in view. Survival instinct never sleeps. He scanned the faces. Most were familiar Malcolm's people. Good people. But 3 were not. Front section, 2 rows apart. Unmoving, not listening to the opening speakers. Just waiting. The man in the center, row 3, was Thomas Hagen. Bumpy recognized the deadness in his eyes. The stillness of a man who had already chosen to kill. Bumpy's hand slid beneath his jacket and felt the weight of his .38 revolver. He could walk down the aisle right now. 2 fast shots. Hagen and his backup dead before they hit the floor. But 400 witnesses. Panic. A stampede. Innocent people crushed. And Malcolm would only die tomorrow instead. You don't stop fanatics by killing one. They're a disease. You have to remove the entire infection. So Bumpy stayed by the pillar. He watched. He waited. 2:40 p.m., the moderator's voice echoed through the ballroom. Brothers and sisters, I present to you Malcolm X. 400 people rose and applauded. Malcolm stepped onto the stage in a simple, dark suit. No security, no bodyguards. Just a man and his message. He raised his hands for silence. The applause faded. Everyone sat. Assalamu alaikum, Malcolm said. Wa alaikum assalam, the crowd replied. Bumpy never took his eyes off Hagen. He watched the killer lean forward slightly. Watched his hand slip inside his coat. Then, chaos. Someone in the middle section jumped up, shouting, "Get your hand out of my pocket." What's wrong with you? A classic distraction. Make everyone turn. Create confusion. In that instant, the killer moved. Thomas Hagen stood. His coat flew open. The sawed-off shotgun came into view low, brutal, built to destroy. Bumpy's .38 was already in his hand, halfway out of his jacket, finger on the trigger. 10 feet, an easy shot. The angle was clean. Then Bumpy saw her, a little girl, white ribbons in her pigtails. In the confusion, she had climbed onto her chair, leaning back to see what was happening behind her. She was directly between Bumpy and Hagen. If Bumpy fired at that downward angle, he couldn't miss her. Bumpy's jaw tightened. He stepped left to clear the shot, blocked by people rising. Right, same problem. That's when Malcolm turned, not toward Hagen, toward Bumpy, as if he had known all along Bumpy would be there. For 2 seconds that felt like hours, their eyes locked. In that frozen moment, Malcolm understood everything. He saw the gun in Bumpy's hand. He saw the desperation on his friend's face, the calculation, the impossible math of violence. He saw the little girl between them, innocent, unaware, leaning into the aisle in her brown Sunday dress. Malcolm knew Bumpy could pull the trigger, knew the bullet would tear through that child before it ever reached. Hagen knew Bumpy was silently asking him a question no man should ever have to answer. Was his life worth hers? Malcolm had spent 10 years teaching that one life was not more valuable than another, that children were sacred. That violence committed in the name of justice was still violence, that the means mattered as much as the ends. Now he had to prove it, not with words, not with speeches, with a choice. So Malcolm gave Bumpy the only answer a man of principle could give. He slowly, deliberately shook his head. Then he smiled, not in fear, not in panic, but in acceptance, and mouthed 3 words: "I die standing." Bumpy's finger locked on the trigger. The man directly in front of him shifted suddenly, completely blocking his view. Bumpy shoved forward, trying to see. Boom! The shotgun blast thundered through the room. When Bumpy's line of sight cleared, Malcolm was stumbling backward, blood spreading across his chest. He tried to stay upright, tried to stand, but 2 more men rushed the stage with pistols, firing again and again. 16 bullets struck Malcolm X. He fell. And Bumpy Johnson, the man who had stopped Dutch Schultz, who had faced the Italian mafia, who had killed without hesitation for 30 years too, frozen, gun in hand, unable to save the one man who mattered most. The ballroom exploded into chaos, screaming, crying, people diving beneath chairs, mothers throwing themselves over their children. Thomas Hagen turned and ran for the exit, shotgun still in his hands, smoke curling from the barrel. Something inside Bumpy snapped, not violently, coldly, precisely, lethally. He moved fast, smooth, predatory. He couldn't fire his gun too many people, too much panic. One shot and innocent blood would spill. So Bumpy ran, closing the distance. 15 feet, 10, 5. Hagen reached the exit door, hands stretching for the handle, seconds from freedom. Bumpy lunged low, swept his leg forward, hooked Hagen's ankle with perfect precision. Hagen's momentum carried him forward as his feet went out from under him. He slammed face first onto the polished ballroom floor. The shotgun flew from his hands, spinning across the wood. Bumpy kicked it hard, sending it sliding beneath a row of overturned chairs. Gone. Hagen scrambled to his knees, wild, reaching for the pistol in his waistband. Bumpy grabbed his wrist and twisted. The small revolver clattered away. Then Bumpy did something unexpected. He didn't kill Hagen. He didn't beat him. He didn't draw his own gun. Bumpy had a reason for not pulling the trigger. It wasn't mercy. It was never mercy. If he fired, he'd be the only man standing with a smoking gun when the police arrived. It would turn martyrdom into a gangland shooting. He wouldn't do that to Malcolm's legacy. And more than that, dead men don't talk. Hagen needed to talk. He needed to name who gave the order, who paid for it, who sanctioned it. This man had taken Malcolm from the people, so Bumpy was going to give him back to them. He grabbed Hagen by the collar, hauled him halfway up, then shoved him backward into the surging crowd. 20 men rushed in. They had just watched Malcolm X be murdered, watched him fall. And now the killer was right there. A fist smashed into Hagen's jaw, then another, then hands grabbing, pulling, striking. Bumpy stepped back. Let them have him. Let them deliver the justice the courts never would. He leaned in close, his voice low but carrying. Don't let him breathe. Don't let him run. Make him answer for what he did. The crowd understood. They pinned Hagen to the floor, holding him down like a wild animal. Police sirens wailed outside, drawing closer. Bumpy Johnson walked calmly toward the side exit through the chaos, through the cries, through the smoke still hanging in the air. By the time police poured through the front doors, by then Bumpy was 3 blocks away, melting into the Harlem streets as if he had never been there. Behind him, Thomas Hagen lay on the floor, bloody, beaten, but alive. Alive to face trial. Alive to rot in prison. Alive to spend the rest of his life knowing he failed. Knowing Malcolm X died standing. Knowing Harlem never forgets. Malcolm X was pronounced dead at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital at 3:30 p.m. 16 gunshot wounds. 39 years old. Gone. didn't go to the hospital. He couldn't. Too many police. Too many questions. Too much attention. Instead, he went somewhere he hadn't entered in years. St. Philip's Church. Small, quiet, empty on a Sunday evening. He sat alone in the last pew, still wearing his blood-stained jacket, Malcolm's blood. An hour later, the old priest, Father Callahan, found him there. "You don't come here," the priest said softly. "No," Bumpy replied. "But you're here now." Bumpy didn't answer. He just stared at the cross above the altar. The silence. The emptiness. "I was 10 feet away," Bumpy finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "Gun in my hand. I could have stopped it. But there was a little girl 6 years old, right in the line of fire." The Callahan sat in the pew ahead of him and turned. "So you chose the child's life over Malcolm's?" "Malcolm chose it." Bumpy's voice broke. He looked at me, saw the gun, and shook his head. "Told me to let him go. Then you gave him what he wanted." I gave him death." Bumpy's fists tightened. "I could have moved, found another angle, done something, but I froze, and I watched him die." The priest was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Malcolm X lived his whole life preparing to die for his beliefs. You didn't take that from him. You honored it. Honoring it doesn't bring him back." "No, but Malcolm knew what he was choosing. He chose integrity over survival. He chose to die standing instead of living on his knees. Few men have that courage." Bumpy stood, buttoned his jacket over the bloodstains. "Hagen's alive. The crowd beat him, but he'll live to stand trial. Can the others?" Bumpy's face hardened. There were 3 shooters. Hagen's in custody. The other 2 ran. Will they escape? "No." His voice was cold. "They won't." Father Callahan understood. "Vengeance won't heal this." "Maybe not." Bumpy turned toward the door. "But it's all I have left to give him." Malcolm X's funeral was held on February 27th at Faith Temple Church of God in Christ. 3,000 people packed inside. Thousands more filled the Harlem streets. Bumpy stood at the back, not with dignitaries, not with family pressed against the wall, watching. Betty Shabazz saw him. Their eyes met across the crowded church. She nodded, one small, sad understanding. She knew Bumpy had been there. She knew he had tried. She knew Thomas Hagen was in custody because Bumpy made sure he couldn't escape. After the service, Bumpy walked alone to Ferncliff's cemetery. He stood at the edge of the open grave, staring down at the casket. From his pocket, he pulled something small, his straight razor. The one he had carried for 30 years. The one that made men cross the street. The symbol of his power, his survival, his code. He placed it gently on the coffin. "You died standing," Bumpy said quietly, "just like you wanted. But the men who killed you, they're going to die scared. That's my promise." And Bumpy Johnson kept it. Within 6 months, the other 2 shooters, the ones who escaped that day, were found. Not by police, by Harlem, by Bumpy's network. They never stood trial. They simply disappeared. The history books don't mention that. They say Thomas Hagen was convicted and the others escaped justice. But ask anyone who lived in Harlem in 1965, and they'll tell you otherwise. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, 3 years after Malcolm. A heart attack at Wells Restaurant in Harlem. No gunfire, no violence, just an old warrior's heart finally giving out. At his funeral, someone asked one of Bumpy's oldest friends what was Bumpy's greatest moment. The man thought for a long time, then said, February 21st, 1965, when he sat in that ballroom with his gun drawn and honored Malcolm's choice, even though it destroyed him inside. That's when Bumpy proved he wasn't just a gangster. He was a man of honor. Bumpy Johnson had killed for money, power, respect, and survival. But that Sunday afternoon, he chose not to kill. He chose to honor a friend's wish. He chose to let Malcolm X die standing with dignity on his own terms. that isn't in the history books, but it should be. Because sometimes the hardest thing a man with a gun can do is not pull the trigger. Sometimes the bravest thing a killer can do is let someone die. Malcolm X died standing, and Bumpy Johnson made sure the world remembered it.